case against our personal preference, but we do so because there has to be a consistency in the law, and if a statute says something, we have to follow that statute. If the case law from appellate courts says something, we have to follow that case law. If we do anything less than that or anything other than that, then we are not being responsible judges. Unlike the judges you see on television, we don't get to do something simply because we want to. We have to have a basis in the facts and in the law.
Understood. Thank you. Judge Wallace, also coming back to you, if you don't mind, what are some of the current issues impacting state courts today?
Well, when you think of that, you always go back to funding. That's critical. Everybody in government, I guess, could say that, but it is important. We think of, particularly in the last few years, the foreclosure crisis and the huge impact that has made on the court system. The legislature has stepped up, and we have some senior judges running a separate division to try to make up that backlog. But that's been a significant challenge. There are a lot of behind-the-scenes things that go on that really help our job as judges, help us be more efficient. That is, case managers to work on managing the caseload and presenting the cases to us for decision making, judicial law clerks to study the law that we need to apply to help us better apply the law. So those are challenges, and we always could be better staffed. We could use more in case management and resources at the court system that could help. But one thing we have done, and it's been a good thing for court access, is to make the courts more accessible to individuals who can't afford an attorney. The area of family law is one example where we have family court services. It's just a walk-in service where you can go in and actually have people help you get the right forms and fill out the forms. They can't give legal advice, but at the courthouse there's a tremendous resource. Go to the courthouse, ask where family court services is, and if you have a family court matter, there are people there who will help you. In a related area, domestic violence is a critical area of need in the community, and if you are the victim or your family may be or friends, there's a place where you can go, and the clerk has people who will assist you in preparing the necessary paperwork for that. And real quick, one last thing is that I remember hearing recently from Judge Moran and others that we're struggling with how to pay attorneys to do criminal cases and to represent criminal defendants, particularly with the death penalty. The legislature, understandably, has been trying to cut back on the expense. They're called due process costs. But the demands of due process also require a lot of legal work to represent the defendants in an effective way, constitutionally adequate way. And thus, how do you pay those attorneys? You expect them just to sacrifice, and it's almost confiscatory of their time is a legal term. So we're struggling now with how to pay private attorneys to provide the representation needed for these people in order for us to provide them their due process rights. We use the public defender and conflict counsel, but this is a need that those organizations can't meet. So it's always a challenge to run a complex court system, but those are some of the ones that we're facing now.
Judge Flower, Judge Cole, do you see any other issues that we're currently facing in Jacksonville in terms of the courts?
I would like to just supplement what Judge Wallace said with regard to court-appointed counsel. I think that there is a fair amount of confusion among the public about when the court will appoint an attorney for you if you're not able to afford one. Certainly in criminal cases, courts will, and in other cases involving due process rights, the court will. For instance, a termination of parental rights case in a juvenile matter where parents are facing the possible loss of their rights as parents, the court will appoint an attorney if a parent can't afford to retain one. But in your typical civil case, and including actually in domestic violence injunction cases, the court does not have the ability to appoint an attorney for someone who cannot afford one, which is why the measures that Judge Wallace was describing regarding access to the courts are so important. Family court services, they're not lawyers, they can't give legal advice, but they can provide access to Supreme Court approved dissolution of marriage forms. They can also assist unrepresented parties in scheduling hearings on their petitions. And given the numbers of pro se litigants, which is exceedingly high, about 2/3 of family law cases involve at least one unrepresented party. So that's an enormous strain on the system, but I think the system is responding well, but undoubtedly there are still things we could do better.
Sure, understood. Judge Flower, what about you?
I would think to dovetail into one of the things that Judge Wallace said, I would think adequate funding for Jacksonville area legal aid and more opportunities for the attorneys to do more pro bono work through legal aid and other organizations is one of the other issues that faces our community, and you made it specific to our community. I believe there's certainly a need for proper funding for those organizations to help those who can't afford an attorney. And so if we were able to find a way to secure adequate funding, whether it's through the bar, through its more volunteer lawyers, more folks helping at those organizations that could even do intake with skills, whether it's from their prior employment or not, I think we can make a bigger impact on the community and instill more feelings of confidence in the system as a whole.
Understood. Kind of following up with what Judge Wallace said, since I know, Judge Flower, you're in the criminal bench, could you talk about the difference between the Public Defender's Office and the Regional Conflict Council, and then the death penalty cases that Judge Wallace was mentioning in terms of how do they get there?
Well, it's contained within the definition. The Regional Conflict Council comes on to cases where the Public Defender's Office has a conflict, or a private attorney may be representing someone and there's a conflict, whether there was a prior representation of maybe a co-defendant or something. And the Public Defender's Office is appointed to represent those who are found to be indigent by the court. There's a formula set up. The clerk of the court actually, through their clerks, does the vetting. There's a appellate process right in the courtroom if the person's found to not to be non-indigent, and they can make an appeal to the judge pursuant to a statute. It's all statutory. And then if they qualify, the Public Defender's Office is appointed. There's different levels of appointment. There's an appointment for purposes of costs. So someone may qualify for, not qualify for the public defender, but not have enough money and be indigent for the purpose of costs. As we speak, actually, some of the rules are being changed a little bit in form, so they're being looked at being changed at this point with regards to some of the forms with regards to indigency. And Regional Conflict Council comes in and picks up those cases where there's a true conflict between the Public Defender's Office and the litigant.
Understood. Thank you. And I guess this is a general question for the entire panel. How can the public learn more about the courts? And I know we've mentioned a few things with Judge Wallace, but I know there are others, like the Informed Voters Project. If one of you could elaborate. We can start with Judge Cole.
Well, the Informed Voters Project is a project that is national in scope, and it's been adopted by former United States Supreme Court Justice Sandra Day O'Connor. She's now retired. And also by Justice Barbara Perriente of the Florida Supreme Court. And the program is designed to provide the citizenry education about the courts so that when they go into the voting booth, they understand how the process works, and more generally, so that they understand the role of the third branch of government.
Judge Flower?
I'm a big believer that judges, as well as other members of the community, should pay civic rent. And civic rent means going out into the community and letting the world see that we're regular people just like they are, and informing them of the things that we do. We're caretakers. We work in a building that's funded by the public. I believe that folks ought to have as much access as possible to our building. I suggest that people come on down, ask us for a tour of the courthouse. We'd probably all be happy to give them. I give lots of them. In the course of the tour, lots of great questions are asked, which stimulates discussions on the Constitution and our role within the branches of the government. Like we said, we're not policy makers. We're there to apply the law to the facts and make a wise and just decision based upon that. But I'd suggest people come on down to the courthouse, take a good hard look at what we're doing every day. All the courtrooms are open. Come on down and let us give you a tour, or come on down and sit in the back of a courtroom.
Excellent. Judge Wallace, what about you?
Well, you know, so much of what the public can learn about the court system comes through the media, and that is good and bad. The media coverage is extensive, often about trials and legal proceedings. In my experience, I find that the media sometimes is excellent, and I applaud the coverage. And other times, it's not their fault, but I had a case one time, a very controversial case involving child custody. One side was, I think, trying to influence the outcome by going public and putting forth their side. The other side wanted absolute privacy. So the public, in my perspective, got a one-sided view and didn't seemingly understand what I was struggling with as a judge. And other times the media presents it as all result-oriented, and I see the comments on the media website sometimes, and I cringe thinking, gosh, I wish I could speak to these people and explain to them what we're doing, because there's so much lack of information and misinformation. But the best thing I can think of is to educate people, is to try to get the people aware of the court process. Judge Flower hosted a tour with a group I was involved in, and they all kept telling me later how wonderful and interesting it was. So we need to promote more interaction. The best way I know is start young with the children. This Justice Teaching Institute is just superb. And lawyers go to the schools and enable the teachers to reinforce the teaching about what we do in the court system. And then it's to try to promote a good and responsible media. The American Board of Trial Advocates is a good organization that's come to my aid and the assistance of a lot of judges, and they try to promote the jury trial, but they also have a mission to protect judges from unwarranted attacks. And they will respond, because we have limits on what we can do and say publicly. We can't really comment about cases, and yet this lawyers group can respond to what's being said about what a judge is doing in the media, and that's been very helpful. But it all goes back to education, and it's sometimes the responsibility of the citizenry to try to educate themselves, and it starts with their children in the school system.
And we try to work closely with the Duval County Public Schools. And I would say virtually every judge that I can think of in this circuit and county is involved in multiple volunteer activities in the community. For instance, the Duval County Public Schools this summer will be bringing 150 English as a second language students to the courthouse for both a tour and a meeting with 5 judges. And so they'll learn a great deal about the courthouse on that occasion. We've also been able, because of the dimensions of our new courthouse, to use it for the community benefit. I think you probably read that the community has very, very significant unmet mental health needs. Well, we used the courthouse jury qualification room for a free all-day seminar, not just for lawyers, but also for mental health professionals, for child care professionals, members of the Department of Children and Families, and we had some of the best mental health professionals in town donate their time to educate the citizenry. So at the same time that they learned about mental health needs in our community, they also had the opportunity to learn about the courthouse while they were there.
Just to mention what Judge Wallace said, I think it's incumbent upon citizens also, because they need to have a little skin in the game, for lack of a better term, and find out what's happening within the court system by contacting the Jacksonville Bar Association. They're very aware of a lot of the programs. Come on down and watch. Like I said before, it's open, and as Judge Cole said, people would be surprised at how many of the judges are out in the community daily, lecturing, speaking, demystifying this process, because we're sort of a unsung third branch of government, co-equal, as our founders expect us to be, but apolitical, for the very reason that we must stay neutral. So I think it's incumbent upon citizens to sort of reach out a little bit and say, hey, I've heard this particular judge is going to a Rotary Club. Let me talk to somebody in the Rotary Club and go on by and listen to them. And I think they'd benefit greatly, and once again sort of demystify everything that's happening within this branch.
Great. I think you've mentioned a website. Do you know of any concrete places that the citizens could go to and visit and read? I mean, everything is online now, so I'm just wondering if you would recommend the site, or if somebody wanted to request a tour or visit a trial, how would they do that?
They could contact court administration in order to request a tour. The Justice Teaching website is particularly useful for teachers. We have a number of judges and lawyers who've been trained in interactive teaching techniques who actually go out into the classroom and use approved lesson plans approved by the Duval County Public Schools and by the state organization of public school superintendents, and we teach about the courts through those lessons, and that's justicesteaching.org.
Thank you, Judge Cole. I'm sorry to interrupt you. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I want to thank our distinguished guests for visiting today. Thank you, Judge Wallace, Judge Flower, Judge Cole. Thank you to our viewers for watching this segment of Legal Issues Facing Jacksonville.
Americans look to their courts for fairness because they trust the judge will handle their case with an even hand, free from the influence of politics and partisanship. When a judge gives every person the same treatment, our courts are what they have always been and must always be: fair and free.
America America's courts are fair. Help keep them that way with an informed vote.